Hi, this is Marlene, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Go to MarlenePardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit Strange Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Good? Good. That's good. As always, I'm doing good. And everything is great out here. What can I say? Because everybody asks me, what's your adventures on the property? Because every week, something else has happened. Well, let's see. My chickens are okay. Like I told you before, I've got my guinea hen on some eggs. For any of you that saw one of my previous shows, I did like a short clip of the property, and I have really, really old live oaks. And at the base, these live oaks have these very large roots. And she kind of made herself, I had a piece of wood leaning against it, and she snuck in there and she made this great nest for herself. And she's there. And I've been checking on her because, to be honest with you, I worry about her because she's not in the coop. She's basically out in the property. And as a matter of fact, I checked on her right before. The last time, I know she must have had, I swear, like 20 something eggs at least. I don't know if she can hatch all of them, but she's on them. And I leave food out for her, but she's doing everything that I see when they're going to hatch the eggs. So let's see what happens. I'll keep you guys posted on that. And then my other exciting thing is the other day we had kind of some rough weather. Branch came down because I've got some poles put in my property. Because it's very dark out here. This is rural, folks, like dark, like no city lights, dark. So we paid a little bit extra, and we have light poles with those lights that turn on at nightfall. We paid to have those put on the property. People think because of security, and it's just not only the security part. It's just that if we ever go out at night, we won't bust our what out there because it's very dark out here. So yeah, a branch came down, brought one of the lines down. I was like, but no, the electric company came out right away and fixed it. So we have light back on. As a matter of fact, some of our neighbors are, that lighting is so nice because, of course, besides that, all you had was porch lights, which out here in the middle of the country, when it's very, very dark, doesn't do anything for you at all. But anyway, let's get on to the good part. The good part has to do with who I have as a guest for tonight. And this is a first-time guest at Stories of the Supernatural. His name is Mr. Jim Willis. And Jim is, let me tell you, I told him right before we started recording, he never a dull moment. Let me tell you something. He's a very, very busy man, or like he told me he was. He worked as a high school band teacher by day and divided his nights and weekends as a symphony trombonist, a jazz musician, a choral conductor on Sunday mornings. He earned his master's degree in religion and entered the Protestant ministry for 40 years. He's authored 12 books on religion and spirituality and served as adjunct college professor in the fields of world religions and instrumental music. He worked part-time as a carpenter, hosted his own drive time radio show. He was a council director and guest lecturer speaking on historical studies to contemporary spirituality. He produced the one-volume encyclopedia of religion titled The Religion Book and Armageddon, now written with his wife, Barbara. And he's made several cross-country bike trips, which inspired a book trilogy about his experiences. He once retired. He wrote The Dragon Awakes, Rediscovering Earth Energy, Ancient Gods and Supernatural Gods. And his recent books include Lost Civilizations, The Quantum Akashic Field, and Hidden History, Ancient Aliens and the Suppressed Origins of Civilizations. I'd like you to help me welcome him. How are you doing, Jim?
Thank you, Marlene. Boy, you make me sound so interesting. Thank you.
Oh, man, I was reading that and I was like, did he, what 3 hours sleep? Wow.
Well,
tell you.
yeah, it's been fun. I always say if you can't do anything well, do a lot of different things, you know. So I've tried to keep my hand in a lot of things.
No, I believe it. You were like, that's a lot. Oh my God. That was what you were up at the crack of dawn, and it's like, okay, well, we'll get a couple of hours of sleep and then back up.
Well, you know, it's fun. I've always been interested in a wide range of things, and they are kind of connected. When I went into the ministry, when I became a Protestant minister and got the Reverend in front of my name, if I had gone to do that, I never would have gone to a music school. But it turns out that going to music school is the best thing you can be for when you're going to be a minister, because you have to use so much music. And as for all the other things, they just kind of led one thing to the other, and it's been a fun life. But I'm 75 years old now, and slowing down quite a bit.
Later on, I'm going to ask you to define that slowing down, because it might be that's what you call that slowing down. But yeah, I understand what you mean as far as, but still, I was like. I used to do long distance biking myself. Not that, really? Not definitely like you. I used to do. I think the longest I did was the the different charities. They would do
Sure.
those. I was never one of these guys or girls, but I want to say it was mostly guys. I had these ultra light bikes with the helmet and this. I was just happy that I crossed the finish line. But I think it was multiple sclerosis. Had a 2-day 150-mile trek. That's the longest I ever did.
Wow, that's great.
Let me tell you, I told everybody that night my nails hurt. I had to take some Tylenol to go on the way back.
It's a trek. The first time I did 100 miles in a day, I was thinking, oh boy, but you get used to it. Of course, back then I was young and foolish.
Oh yes, I know. It's a different, but even then, but you look at it like let me tell you something, because you told me that you did some of this. I take it in Florida. Did you do any of the writing in Florida?
We spent 5 years in Florida. When I retired from ministry, that was where my last church was. We were just 5 years there. Most of my time has been up in New England.
The reason why I'm saying this is that, and for anybody that's ever ridden bikes, like when you look at people either going up those hills, in Florida, the good thing as far as South Florida is it's flat.
Yeah, but
you're going up one of those bridges that we have, or you're going in against the wind, which is like, oh my God.
When I started biking in Florida, one of my big biking loves is to bike rivers. I've done, for instance, the river up, can't even think of the name of the river now, up in New England, that and a couple of other rivers. But when I was down in Florida, I did the length of the bicycle, the length of the St. John's.
Really? Florida? Wow.
And it was tough, because I know there are no hills to climb, but you don't get a chance to rest either. No downhills.
Right. Yeah, that's what
it was hard. You're going at it all the time. So I enjoyed around the St. John's. And then when I retired and came up here, I wanted to do one more river. So I did the Savannah River. Okay. And from the source to the sea, and that was why I had to write a book about that one. So that's my book.
They have, just out of curiosity, when you follow that, do they actually have? Are you riding on regular streets? Do they have bike trails for you guys?
No, they're very seldom do they have bike trails. There's a bike trail for a couple of miles along the Savannah. Mostly you have to find your way, and a lot of times you can't even see the river. Sometimes you may be even a mile or two away from it, but you can generally by going back and forth stay fairly close. But it was fun. I really enjoyed it.
At least I don't know about you, but for myself personally, I felt a big feeling of accomplishment once I actually finished.
And biking can be very meditative, as I'm sure well know. It's kind of a Zen thing. You got the rhythm, and your mind is just free to go. You can't distract yourselves with all kinds of iPhones or anything like that.
Oh, no.
And so it's It can be very nice. I find it very restful and very meditative.
Yeah, so it's great. It's
It's
true.
been very valuable.
Me personally, I've always liked to do things outside as far as whether it's exercise or anything like
Yeah,
that. So
yeah,
and usually a lot of times the things I participated, they try to route them through scenic areas or scenic, whatever coastlines or stuff like that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a very nice, and you get to meet a lot of nice people.
yeah. Oh,
Also,
that's great. When I did my cross country bike trips from California, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, I I did it years ago, and I've, to be honest, I think I experienced the very tail end of something that just doesn't exist anymore, because in places you can find it, but a couple of times I've been where I have bicycled before. I've been back visiting or doing a tour or a trip or a speaking tour or something like that, and I'll try to find the roads that I bicycled on with these neat little restaurants and nice little
mhm.
family motels along the way and stuff. They seem to be all gone now.
Yes,
The roads that I enjoyed the most are super highways now,
the
and the
mom and pop
restaurants.
places. Yeah.
Yeah, the restaurants are all, pretty much the chain stores, and in order to even find restaurants nowadays, you usually have to find where a couple of highways cross, which means even if you're out in the boondocks biking, you've got to make your way to a restaurant or a motel at night, which means finding a highway and then finding the intersections and finding the motels along the highway.
Yes,
It's
if you go through
it's
some of
just
these
not the
towns, like
same.
town square, you
Yeah,
see a lot
yeah.
of closed down buildings now,
Yeah.
and
Oh, it's so sad.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so sad. But I've had some wonderful, wonderful experiences meeting people. I was out in Arizona, and I had out there in those big patches of desert. Sometimes all you can do is follow is ride near where the interstate goes through. And sometimes, of course, you have to ride on the interstate sometimes in
Mhm.
Arizona, New Mexico, and I don't like it, but then they shift you off and they go into these little access roads and stuff, and sometimes they can get a little confusing out there. And one of the greatest experiences I had, I was trying to get to Yuma that night, Yuma, Arizona, and I came to this. I was totally turned around, lost. I didn't know where. I mean, I kind of knew which direction east and west was, but I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know how to get to Yuma exactly. And I I came across this little uh, small little house out in the middle of nowhere, with a woman out in front, and she was raking, and the chickens were all over the place and everything else. And I stopped and got off the bike, and I said, "How do I get to Yuma?" Well, it turned out she didn't speak any English. She only spoke Spanish, and I didn't speak any Spanish. So we jabbered back and forth, smiling at each other. And I
Yeah,
kept,
right, right.
so she went and got her husband. He didn't speak any English either, but we had fun. Finally, they got their daughter, who did speak a little bit of English, and she came out. And I said, "How far to go to Yuma?" And as soon as I said the word "go to Yuma," all of a sudden the dawn broke, and they knew what I was
Yeah,
doing.
they're like,
So
"Oh,
so
no."
the man was giving me directions. He goes, "As you go basically this way 2 miles, this way two," and everything else. And I finally figured out how to get to Yuma. So I got back on the bike, and as I went away after this wonderful conversation where neither one of us knew what anybody was saying, I said the only words I know in Spanish. So I just says gracias. And this woman looked at me, who hadn't spoken a word of English. She says, "Thank you very much."
Isn't that great?
And
Everybody says
that
exactly
was the
the same
extent of our conversation.
Yeah, but you found you might take it because here you are.
I found Yuma that night, right?
Let me
But
tell you something.
I'll
You're
never
brave.
I'll
I
never
mean,
forget her.
I went one time. I did cross country from here, Florida, to go to California, and that I think is it I-10, or I know it's a road that
Yeah.
takes you out
Uh-huh.
to
Uh-huh.
Texas and then New Mexico and Arizona, and there's nothing out there.
Yeah. 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 When Barb and I were writing Armageddon Now, we were living in a little trailer out in Arizona, right above the border, a little town of Nogales.
Uh-huh.
And while we were out there, I fell in love with the desert. But even then, it was different. I mean, we were there, 20 years ago, 18 years ago now. And the weather has changed so much out there.
Really?
We talk to people who live out there now, and it's just nothing for the temperature to get up above 110 in Phoenix and just stay there the whole
Oh my
time.
God.
And forget
Okay.
this business about being dry heat. 110 is 110.
No, it is. It is. It
I
is.
don't care whether it's
I
dry
remember
or
that I
wet.
did part of that trip. As a matter of fact, on purpose, I did it at nighttime. But you
Yeah.
see a lot of those, I guess, constantly where people can pull over, I guess, if the car
Oh,
overheats.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
You see it a lot. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, this in the middle of the day. I can imagine at noontime.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah. You
but
have to be careful, and you have to be careful on those things on a bicycle because there's cactus thorns there, and the cactus thorns will pierce the bicycle tires. Man, I had more flat tires coming through the desert out
really,
there.
you know
Yeah.
what? There was one. I can't remember if I can't remember if it was Arizona or New Mexico. That how usually as you're going down these roads, at the exits, you at the very least get a gas station or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All of a sudden, we pass one. There's like nothing, and then we see this sign that says, "What was it? Close to like some type of prison. Do not pick up any hitchhikers."
Oh,
I can't remember if it was Arizona or New Mexico that we were traveling through.
it could
And
have
it
been
was
either.
like, okay, no, don't worry, I'm not about to. And then I realized that that's why they didn't have any type of businesses off
Yeah.
the exit.
Yeah.
No gas stations, nothing.
When we were living out there, we would see a lot of people coming up, who had crossed over the border, swam the river, or crossed over through the mountains, and were making their way up, illegal immigrants. And very rarely did they speak English, but my wife Barb speaks Spanish, so we would see them out there. And sometimes, these coyotes would bring them across and drop them off and say, if you walk for 2 or 3 hours, you'll get to Phoenix. Well, if you drive for 2 or 3 hours, you get to Phoenix. Leave them off in the desert with no water, no nothing. And it was just terrible. Yeah.
Because I can imagine that without water, and like you said, in that type of temperature, anybody's gonna basically pass out. And I've heard that every once in a while, well, not every once in a while, more often than not, they do come across people that have passed away. And basically, they've died of exposure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they let them loose, and it's like, make your way.
Yeah, sad to say that happens often.
But now you're in New England. Then you're off. You're left all the hot weather and
yeah, we left New England to go out to Arizona, and we were out there for a couple of years. Had some wonderful talks while we were doing Armageddon Now, the end of the world, A to Z. We like to call it 500 pages of light reading about all the different ways the world can end.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you real quick, because I see that you wrote these books on religion, spirituality.
Yeah.
And then you did the religion book and the Armageddon. And was there a specific reason or something happened that triggered that you wanted to write this book?
Well, it's been a journey. It really has. If you have time, I'll tell you the story, because my first book that I wrote was about bicycling. It's a book called Journey Home. And it was about a bicycle trip I made from Florida, where my folks lived in Sarasota, up to New England. And that book, at the time I wrote that book, I was also teaching. I was a professor of comparative religion, teaching world religions at a college up in Massachusetts. And that book, Journey Home, got into the hands somehow of an editor at Visible Ink. And they were looking for someone who could do a book on religion, and they wanted a kind of an encyclopedia of religion, ABC, and all that kind of thing. And so she called me and asked if I was interested, and of course I said yes. And it worked out very well, because what I did basically was use the syllabus that I had written for my course on different world religions. And I had written a glossary for the students, so they would have, every time they came into school, I would give them 2 or 3 pages of terms that they would use. And so I just kind of really amplified that until out popped the religion book. And after that, Visible Ink asked me to do a kind of a follow-up book, and they asked if I might do something about. At that time, especially, there was a lot of talk about, there were a lot of the end of the world and conspiracy things were starting and everything else. And there was a lot of talk about all the things that can go on. And so that out of that came Armageddon Now. And then I went kind of a hiatus for a while because I was going through a strange time in my life. I was a minister, so I was involved in churches, and I had my own church. I was a pastor of a church, and I discovered something kind of strange when I went into ministry back in 72, 73, 1973, something like that. When I went into ministry, I kind of expected, because I had a spiritual bent. I wanted my spiritual questions, or the big questions. Who are we? You know, what's on the other side? Where are we at? And all this kind of stuff. And so I wanted to ask those questions. And I had the misguided idea that somehow if I was in a church, I would be surrounded by this community of like-minded people, and we'd all be growing together spiritually and everything. And it doesn't work that way. You know, it's a business like everything else. You've always got the next meeting, you got the next church service, you got the next sermon, you got the next subject of lectures, you've got the next seminar, and always the next, you know, always thinking. And after 40 years of this, when I wound up my ministry in Florida, and I was 62 years old. I was really too young to retire, but I needed to confront this essential reality that I had been preaching about my whole life. I needed to connect with spirit. I was preaching about it and teaching about it, but I wasn't experiencing it. And so I came out here in the woods, and I decided I was going to, you know, take God on. I was going to wrestle with him. I even had a Bible verse in my mind. The Bible verse comes from the book of Genesis, the story of Jacob and Esau, who were two brothers, and Jacob defrauded his brother Esau of the birthright and had to flee for his life. And after a long time, Jacob spent up north in what we now know as Turkey, Anatolia, probably around the same place where Göbekli Tepe is and all that kind of stuff. He finally came back to be reunited with his brother. And the night before they were going to be reunited, Jacob was on one side of the river, Esau was on the other. And Jacob was worried. He didn't know what kind of a greeting he was going to get, and he didn't know what his brother was going to say or do. And so he was pacing back and forth. And it's a strange story about how all of a sudden this being appears to Jacob, and Jacob starts to wrestle with him. And it said they wrestled all night. Now, why? I don't know, but that's what the story says. Okay. And they wrestled all night until finally, as the dawn broke, Jacob realized that he was wrestling with God, according to the story. And Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And it was a very, very powerful story. And so finally, Jacob loses the battle, and God puts his hip out of joint and everything else. But Jacob wrestled with God, saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And when I retired, 13 years ago now, when I retired and came out here to the woods, that was the verse that was in my mind. I wanted to confront God, and I wanted to say, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And it was really a prayer. I wanted to confront the essential metaphysical, supernatural, paranormal spirit, whatever we want to call it. And my prayer was answered over the years. It wasn't answered within the confines of Christianity. That's not how it came. It came about through a process that now would probably be called much closer to paganism, to shamanism. But that's where I found that reality. And that verse, and so that's really why I came out here, and that's where all the books started and everything else. I have to tell you one follow-up to this story, though, because a couple of years ago, I was asked to go over to Cornwall in the UK and give a seminar over there about the roots of world religions. And so I went over. I flew into London and took the train down and stopped and saw Stonehenge and Salisbury Cathedral, and I met this wonderful group of people down there in Cornwall. But when I finished the seminar, and it was wonderful, successful time, and I still have good friends from that time, I decided there was something I had to do. I had to rent a car and drive up to this little town called Fenny Compton, which is up northwest of London, because my ancestors used to preach in the old stone church in Fenny Compton. It still stands. It's still being used. They were members of the Church of England, and they were, pastors there, and they would preach in this pulpit and everything else. And so when I got up to Fenny Compton, I stayed at this wonderful little bed and breakfast and had fish and chips and all the rest of the stuff that you do in England. And the next morning I met the town historian who took me into the church, and she let me in, and I was able to stand there where my great, however many great ancestors used to preach. And there was a big plaque on the wall saying Willis and everything else. Well, I went to stand up in this pulpit, and I saw a stained glass window that you could only really see well from the pulpit. It was situated that was the stained glass window that the minister would see every single Sunday. And my great ancestor looked at that stained glass window every single Sunday. And the stained glass window was, lo and behold, a picture of Jacob wrestling with God, saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me."
Wow.
Now, how that was passed down through my spiritual DNA down
That
5
is
or 6 or
incredible.
7 generations, I don't know, but I wonder sometimes, what they would think of me. They would probably not consider me Christian anymore, but they would.
Let me tell you something. Like what you said, how they say about genetic memory, because that's incredible.
Yeah.
The importance of that as far as your family when you went there on purpose, because it was your one opportunity.
I think I was led there. I really think I had to close the circle. I really think so. There's forces much bigger than all of us at work in the world. I'm not really as comfortable with the word God anymore that I used to be, because when I say the word God and somebody else says the word God, it's too easy to think that we know what the other person is talking about when we may have totally different conceptions about what God is, or what spirit is, or Manitou, or source, or whatever, ground of being,
the divine, however you want to
But there's no question about it. I came looking for God, and found that my current understanding of God here in the woods, and I'm sure that my ancestors somehow had something to do with bringing me here, and I'm sure that it had something to do with closing the circle when I went back to talk to them again. It was quite an experience.
I can imagine that historian must have been thrilled when you walked in through the door and you told them who you were.
Oh yeah, when she heard my name, and she took me right to the plaque where that says Reverend Willis preached here, and then gave the dates and everything else up on the wall, and then she took me around back to the church, where now there's just a mound of grass, ground covered with grass, but that's where the parsonage was, where he lived for so long, and where my ancestor lived, and it was quite a time. I'll never forget the experience. That's for sure.
Let me ask you something, Jim. In that book that you were writing, as far as part of the Armageddon, do you describe Armageddon as literally as Armageddon, or
that was
the effects of, how can I say it without being literally what's described in the Bible?
I know what you mean. To be honest, I think it was a very unfortunate title, because the book itself, although strangely enough, it's out of date, but talk about serendipity. This very morning, I wrote a letter to my publisher, says, that book is 20 years old. Maybe it's time we redid it. And so who knows what's going to happen or not. But he wanted to use the word Armageddon because, he thought the biblical thing, but it isn't about the biblical idea of Armageddon as we read in the book of Revelation. It really talks about all of the different ways the world or societies or civilizations or cultures could collapse. And so the word Armageddon was really used as a metaphor. And I think it probably turned some people away from the book because they thought it was just going to be another religious, tome based on the book of Revelation or something like that. And it's not that at all. But so we used it as a metaphor. But then again, I think it can be a very valuable metaphor, because even as it's used in the Bible, everybody thinks of Armageddon as being the end. And it's not. There's a brand new beginning on the other side. And I like to say that between what was and what shall be, there is always a time of chaos. I think we're in a time of chaos right now. I think what we used to be and what we are going to be is now separated by this chaotic time in which we live, with fire and flood and famine and war and pestilence and pandemic and everything else.
Well, I think that everybody, most humans are resistant to change, even
Yeah,
regular
yeah.
change.
Oh yeah.
So now everybody's like,
Yeah, and it takes. I think it takes a time of chaos. I like to describe it as, when the Roman Empire fell and collapsed, Europe settled into what we now call the Dark Ages, and that was the time of chaos. But within the Dark Ages, even, there were seeds that were starting to flower until they finally burst forth into bloom in the Enlightenment, and that was that time of chaos. And so I get discouraged, like everybody else is, with what's going on in the world, right now in these days.
right.
But I still can't help but think that there are enough people who are trying to evolve spiritually, that the seeds are being sown to look at the world in a different way and experience different things. And all of this dissension, for instance, between religion, people talk about all the death of religion and all this kind of stuff. Then they say, well, as a former minister, doesn't it bother you, to see the churches falling apart and fighting with each other and all kind of stuff? Yeah, it bothers me. But on the other hand, it almost had to be, because we live in a time when religion, even now in our day, it often is being weaponized.
Yes.
My God against your God. And I often think of Moses and Jesus and Muhammad and the Buddha could all get together, and some of the ancient Hindu rishis, along with some of the Chinese philosophers and everything else, Confucius and Lao Tzu, if they could all sit down together, and they didn't live that far apart in history. A lot of them were about the same time, 500 years before, 500 BCE. A lot of them, if they would just sit down and talk to their followers who have built these complicated doctrine fenced in dogma type religions, I don't think they ever intended any of that. Most of those, they all started with a shamanic experience. They all had a vision of God that was different and unique, and they tried to convey that vision. Moses at the burning bush, Jesus went out into the wilderness, Muhammad went to the cave, and all the other kinds of things. And if the followers had been faithful, the world would be a different thing. But instead, they built this idea saying, my guru, my founder's vision is the right one.
Right. Well, I think that happens with any religion.
Yeah. I think you're right.
When like you said, it's used to drive division instead of unity. Okay.
Yeah.
And or like you said, when it's weaponized, and that's when things go, for lack of a better word, south. And it doesn't really fulfill the intent. I think the original intent.
Exactly.
Which is love and unity and understanding among humans.
Yeah. Exactly. And all the other books kind of sprung from that. Since I've been up here, I started writing, Dragon Awakes, of course, which is now out of print, but that was my introduction to Dowsing and Earth Energies. And then after that, the publisher wanted a book about lost civilizations, or ancient gods, rather. Who were the ancient gods? All the different possibilities of ways of interpreting who were the ancient gods that these people were writing about. And that led to supernatural gods. And of course, that led to lost civilizations, and then hidden histories. And then the quantum Akashic field, which is really my only book that is seriously about dowsing. But it's a book.
Have you always been involved with dowsing, Jim? Or did that come about?
No, I didn't believe in it for my whole life. I was up here. I was probably 63 years old. And I had I had never believed in dowsing. I just didn't. I didn't think that it had any common sense. I was a very left-brain theologian, all my
Yeah.
life. And I came up here, and one morning I decided, I don't know why, I wanted to learn how to dowse. And the only kind of dowsing I knew was dowsing for water. So I went down to the local hardware store, and they didn't have any dowsing rods. I can't imagine why the hardware store but they didn't have any dowsing rods, but they did have some heavy gauge copper wire.
Okay.
So I got 2 pieces of copper wire and cut them into about 18 inches long and bent them into the shape of a letter L. And I saw on the internet that when you walk across water, they're supposed to cross or open up or something like that. So I went out with the dowsing rods and walked out my front yard. I walked across, I don't know how many acres, nothing. Struck out totally. Even when I went to the place where I knew the water line was that ran from our well to the house,
Not even that.
because I built the house and I saw we drilled the well. So I knew where the water line was. Nothing. Couldn't get a thing. So I came back inside and went back to the internet, and I heard about this crazy thing called dowsing for energy, earth energy.
Okay.
And that sounded kind of fascinating. So I went outside concentrating on earth energy and took the step that has changed my life 13 years ago. It changed my life completely. The dowsing rods were just like 2 sticks in my hand, nothing happening. And all of a sudden, concentrating on earth energy, I took one step and they swung together so much, they almost hit me in the face.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it. So I stepped back and I kept on getting Barb. I said, Barb, watch me. Make sure I'm not moving my hands. Make sure not. And I discovered a river of energy flowing right through our property. This is about 87.5 inches wide. And I discovered we had built our house right on an energy line. And we were living in a place which was extremely loaded with energy lines in and out and everything else, because it turns out this was not only a place where ancient people some would sometimes bury their dead, but they would also come, and it's a rock quarry. And every year they would come back and they would get these rocks that they would use to make their tools, quartz tools, and even before that. And so this was a very energetic area, and I'm sure we were just drawn to it, but we didn't know it at the time. And so I went crazy then. I started dowsing for earth energies. And then when I came to understand how you can ask yes or no questions, and the rods would always cross in front of me for a yes and remain solid still for a no. And all of a sudden I asked one kind of a question and something weird happened inside me, and both rods swung to the right. And now that had never happened before. They had either crossed or stayed still. Both rods swung to the right. And all of a sudden, I began to ask some questions and discovered, lo and behold, a spiritual entity that I even gave a name to him because the name was just stuck in my head, Sabuko. And Sabuko became kind of a spirit guide. And it took about 3 years before I finally figured out who Sabuko was.
What was the question that you asked that your rods did that?
I said, it was something about, am I understanding this? No, can you explain this to me better if I ask better questions? And then both rods swung to the right.
All right. Okay.
And it took about 2 or 3 years of having this conversation with Sabuko before I finally found out who Sabuko was. Sabuko is me on the other side.
Okay.
He was the spiritual entity that we call in Christianity, we refer to guardian angels, and we refer to spirit guides in some cases, or helpers or something like that.
Okay.
And lo and behold, it changed my life completely, because up till that time I had the idea that I was kind of the center of the universe and everything else was around me. And all of a sudden I realized, no, I am a projection into the material world from the real reality on the other side. The real me is eternal on the other side, still there, and I am the projection into material world of that entity called Sabuko. So I tell about this story in the quantum Akashic field. And from there came, my first out of body experience, and then learning how to do out of body experiences, and then going up to Monroe Institute, where, they're doing some tremendous work up there and studying with Bill Buellman for a week, who I consider one of the great teachers today in out of body experiences. And for a for a conservative Christian minister to all of a sudden turn and change completely, it all happened, and I didn't expect it. It was totally, and it all happened because I said to God, to Spirit, to whatever, I will not let you go until you bless me. And
you didn't know what you were asking for. In other words,
no, I didn't. And the prayer was answered in ways that I never would have expected at all.
Let me ask you, do you think that the entity Sabuko had, when you said like a guardian angel or a spirit guide, that it's been with you always from the moment of your birth?
Yeah, I think so. As a matter of fact, I think I like to consider the different religions of the world. I used to explain it to my students. The different religions of the world are really like software that you use to access the hardware. The hardware is spirit. The hardware is God or Manitou. That's the hardware. And all of these different religions are software that we use. And you can get really good on one piece of software, and you can really learn how to use it so you can access and manipulate the hard drive. The trouble is that the software doesn't speak to each other. If I'm using one kind of software and somebody's using another kind of software sometimes. So I think what I had to do was, in my own case, and I'm not saying everybody's like this, of course, but in my own case, I think I had to learn one kind of software really well and become very familiar with it so that I would have access to the hard drive, to God. And in my case, Christianity was the software that I learned. To this day, I still call myself a Christian, although I'm sure there are many Christians out there who don't consider me to be a Christian. But to this day, I still call myself a Christian, but a totally different kind. When I read the Bible now, or when I think of the great tenets of Christianity, everything from what does the virgin birth mean to what does Armageddon mean to all this kind of thing. It's nice to be grounded in something so that you can have something to relate to. But to this day, I get a kick out of it because I was like most Christians, you talk to me about angels, and you talk to me about spirit guides and all this kind of stuff, and I would say, no, you're talking about shamanic experiences, and
all new age stuff.
No. And then at Christmas, we would all stand up together and sing, "Angels we have heard on high," right, or "Angels from the realm of glory." Or I go back and read the book of Isaiah in the Hebrew scriptures, and the first chapter of Isaiah is a classic shamanic journey. Isaiah had a vision, and he actually had an out-of-body experience in terms of pure shamanism, where he went to the other side. He ascended to the upper world, and there he was given a message of healing and a message for the tribe. And then he said, God said, "Who am I going to send?" And Isaiah said, "Here I am, send me." And he came back. That's exactly what the shaman does, coming back with the spiritual wisdom for the tribe. And now I go back and I read the Bible, and I find unidentified flying objects. I find shamanic journeys. I find angels and spirit guides. I didn't see any of that stuff for 40 years. And it was there all the time in plain sight.
Can you imagine? Let me ask you, do you think that when you were basically doing what you were doing during those 40 years, I imagine sometimes it's like this would have been too much of a conflict at that point, because how would you handle something like that?
Yeah, it could have been. I probably would have had to leave the ministry.
Right. That's what I'm going with that. It's like,
if I didn't leave, I might have been kicked out. That kind of thing.
Do you do? And I know you've mentioned shamanism. Anything as far as remote viewing?
Yes. Yeah. I haven't had as much experience with specifically with remote viewing as a lot of other people that I've talked to, but it has happened from time to time, and I have been able to find people. It was really interesting because one story, had this very vivid dream, and I'll make it quickly because it's a long
Sure.
story, but I had a very vivid dream about my father who passed away, and I saw him in my dream coming back. And the dream was very symbolic. He was getting off an airplane carrying a suitcase, and he was coming back basically into his next life. And so I knew that he had been reincarnated. And I wanted to find him. And with the dowsing rods and with some intense meditation, I even found the city where he was,
Really?
and was able to actually go there. And he saw me. And there were other adults in the room who did not see me. But you know how kids can sometimes see to the other side when the adults don't see them.
Yeah.
And he saw me and he recognized him. And I was his spirit helper for a while.
Right.
And I was actually able to locate, when I went outside, I was actually able to locate the street where he was on and find the name of it. And I was actually able to find his name. And when I came back into my body and started doing some research, I was actually able to Google the very street, the name of the street and everything else. And I know what his name is. I know where he was. Sad to say, like most kids, by now, this was a couple of years ago, and by now he's been taught by his elders that spirit helpers and imaginary friends don't exist. So he doesn't see me anymore, and I'm finding it very difficult to see him. But at least I had that experience. It was a wonderful experience, and to be able to follow it up, to actually find out a map and Google and see the same thing.
Right, it confirms for yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So it was quite an experience. I know a lot of people, even people who hear me tell this. I don't think I've ever told this particular story on the air before, but a lot of people, if I tell them this kind of story, they would just kind of look and smile and say, "Yeah, well, sure," But once you have the experience, and once you see it, and once you follow it up for yourself, I kick myself now, because as a minister, so many times I was called in the middle of the night to a hospital room where one of my parishioners was dying, and I would be there holding their hand and praying with them while they died. And a number of times, probably a dozen times or more, they would have the experience of actually dying, flatlining, and then coming back.
Yes.
And the nurses and the doctors would shove me out of the way and everything else. And then after they were back and after they were stabilized, the next day I would have a chance to go and talk to them. And they would tell me these stories about somebody appearing at the bed, at the foot of the bed. It might have been, depending on their religion, it might have been Jesus, or it might have been Moses, or it might have been a figure of light, or it might have been a family member, or something like that. I was a minister, and I just didn't believe any of that stuff. Now, I didn't argue with them. I didn't say, "Oh no,
you just thought it was somebody that was."
Yeah, I didn't say, "Oh, your brain was just shutting down. The blood was shutting down." I didn't do that. But now I'm looking at it, and I realize they did see somebody. They had a real out of body or near death experience, and I'm kicking myself that I lost out on the opportunity to learn so much from those people, most of whom are not alive anymore. But and I just, through my own ignorance and through my own hard-heartedness and thick-headedness, I didn't take advantage
of these nurses, especially the ones that do that overnight.
Yes.
They say that once they hear some of their patients
start
talking either to deceased family members.
Yep. Yeah.
They already know that there's a very good chance that this person is going to pass away very soon.
Yeah.
Because they say at nighttime is usually when things slow down.
Yep.
And
I've even had nurses tell me that they, going into a dim room, they can actually see something leaving the body when that time comes. It's phenomenal. Just phenomenal to me.
Right. And they say, you can't, and they say we've seen this happen even with people, because you could say, well, if it's an elderly person or they have dementia, well, it's just a symptom, but they've seen it happen with younger people that are in there. Sometimes they have a serious health problem or whatever. And some of them have even had visuals, like you said, they've walked into a hospital room and they've actually seen like an outline of somebody there, and then that person has talked or said, I saw so and so.
Yeah.
Um,
and it's heartbreaking, the number of people who have had this experience and are afraid to tell anybody because they don't want to get laughed at, you know.
Oh no.
Just a shame.
A lot of times it's like, you know, they just like keep it to themselves. You know, it kind of circulates among themselves. And I've even heard of some doctors that they have those couple of nurses that they know, these are my, like, for lack of a better word, those are my divining rods.
Yeah.
Because when they tell me, hey, take a look, keep an eye on so and so.
Yeah.
Because of this, they're like, they pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Because there's always a couple in the crowd that are really attuned as to what's going on with patients.
Right.
Even if they seem to sometimes even look to be improving.
Yeah. And you know, when people talk like this, they say, oh, this is well, it used to be, this is new age, or this is something different. For the vast majority of time that the humans have been on this earth, this has been taken for granted. It's really only been in the last couple of 200, 300, 400 years, may at the most, that this kind of thinking has become pushed out and the intellectual side came in. It used to be that people would have these experiences all the time. You go back to ancient Ireland, or even Ireland of 500 years ago, or in some places of Ireland or Scotland even today, where you got you know, people telling stories about they just call them by different names, you know, leprechauns or you know, fairies or whatever. For most of the time humans have been on this planet, this was just accepted. People saw it.
It almost makes you think, though, and I'm going to say, when I say organized religion, I mean organized religion regardless of denomination.
Yeah, sure.
It's almost like they become jealous of when a human being divides their attention or their belief to something that's not in their purview. It's like, no, that's bad, or, you know, that's devil, related to the devil. This is where you need to give all your religious or your intent towards.
This is so common, and it's a central tenet of my last book is called Censoring God. It's about the books that didn't make the cut when the Bible was put together. But, you know, basically, when you look at the history, for instance, of Christianity, organized Christianity, 300 years after Jesus, assuming that there was ever a historical Jesus, or whether he's a composite, doesn't make any real difference right now. But some 300 years after that, Constantine wanted to unite the Roman Empire, a far-flung empire that ran from England all the way over to the Far East, or the Middle East, you know, and down into Egypt. And so the way to unite it, he used religion, and he wanted a monolithic type religion that would, in other words, people would have to go, if they wanted to get to God, they had to go through this particular, you know, religious exercise, and they had to report to their priests and their denominations and their churches. And he eliminated the Gnostics, because the Gnostics said, no, everybody can have a direct access to God. Finally, they were cut off from the Eastern Church for that same kind of reason. And basically what he was saying was, we want to stand between you and God. So if you want to get to God, you got to come through us. And it was a power move. It was a political move. And it's still being used today. Just a couple of months ago, there was big headlines that President Biden was one of the, he was only the second Roman Catholic president we've had. And although his own personal concerns about abortion, which concerns the Catholic Church, his own personal concerns are in line with what the church is thinking. His voting record has been very much the opposite, because he didn't want to impose his particular religious beliefs on everybody. And so there was a group of conservative priests who met, and they were going to withhold communion from the president. He said, you can't take mass, and you can't come to mass anymore. Well, according to Roman Catholic tradition, communion is one of the accesses to God, one of the doorways to God. And so what they were basically saying is, you can't get to God without going through us. It's a political move. And it's just a shame how what we have done with these religions. I think you're absolutely right when you talk about
and
power move.
That the schism within the Catholic Church that brought us with Martin Luther into Protestantism was because you had bishops and people selling favors.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were basically, you could buy yourself your way into heaven or forgiveness or
My,
all these things. Even if you had done atrocities, if you had committed atrocities and you had, maybe you were a landowner or something, and you could, you had the money, in other words.
yeah.
You got old and you remembered all your sins, and it was like, oh, not ready to go to the hot place. Hold on.
My favorite story about that was back in the days of the Inquisition, when the Roman Catholic Church was building these big cathedrals all over the place, and they had to raise a lot of money. And they had to, by that time, developed an idea of purgatory. The idea of purgatory is when we leave here, we go to this place called Purgatory. And when your people left behind, when they pay enough money or say enough masses or say enough prayers, then you get out of purgatory. And there was one of the Catholic priests, Johann Tetzel, would go from town to town to raise money. And he'd sing this little song. It's an historical song. As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a shame.
And if you didn't, and people don't realize that back in those years, people truly, truly believed that they would be damned to hell, and really horrible things would happen, and you were excommunicated, or you as far as no baptism for a child. Yep. I mean, people truly embraced. It was not like, oh, well, maybe that's not real. They truly believed all of this. So they basically had a very powerful hold on the population.
Yeah.
As far as that, your soul was in peril.
Yep.
I believed it. How can I tell you that?
Yeah. And it was much more political than spiritual. And it's just a shame. Just a tragedy.
And historically, I mean, and you've done it, what they did with the Cathars and all different little offshoots that were trying to do their own thing.
Yes.
And if you presented any type of challenge to, you want to say, the Vatican or the established, they kind of snuffed you out really quick.
And it's we see it in Israel right now, in Judaism, the schism between the conservative and the liberal, and the using religion and we see it especially, of course, in Islam right now. All you have to do is look at Afghanistan and Sharia law and all the rest. It's just a terrible thing that we have done with something that was originally a beautiful new way of understanding spirit. And
exactly. The intent, you can see the intent, and then of course it gets massaged. Yes. It's a nice word. It's massaged for somebody's personal gain, and it's not. But you, in one of your books, you talk about ancient civilizations and aliens. Do you, without knowing the contents of the book, do you believe then that we've had alien contact starting with ancient civilizations?
Oh, yeah. I think so. I think we've been visited in the past, not only by other beings who are from this galaxy, from this particular place, but also I think from other dimensions. I think we are being watched. Yeah. So
you think, as far as, and I've discussed this sometimes with other people, as far as, because we always originally thought of extraterrestrials as in coming on a spaceship, like light year travel, but then we think of, are we talking intradimensional travel?
Exactly. Versus, I've traveled to different dimensions in out-of-body experiences. Now, if I can do it, why can't they do it? And people talk about, well, there can't be aliens visiting Earth because of the physics involved. Well, I think there's ways to move around that are not necessarily subject to the physical laws that we have discovered.
Or they have some type of apparatus or something, or a pill they take that.
It's hard to.
You know what? I cannot remember right now who the author was on it. It was a sci-fi. It was a short story, a sci-fi. And to me, it was like, this makes a lot of sense. And it's a mission that goes to this distant planet, and it's a very inhospitable planet. And I believe there was 3 people left, and one of them, they had some type of contraption that basically would allow you to exist in that terrain, whatever it was. It would acclimate you and make you be able to go out there without the spacesuit and all that.
Yeah.
So they send
Yeah.
the first guy out. He never comes back. They're starting to
Yeah.
get worried something. The second one goes out in search of him. He doesn't come back. The third one finally is like, he's ready to leave because he's thinking he's lost his two companions. What it turns out is that after they would go through this process, and of course, this is the very, very abridged version of that short story. What happened is that what seemed to them as human beings, as a very inhospitable planet, was harsh. Once they got transformed by this machinery, of course, it's a sci-fi story, it was a beautiful place.
Yeah.
So for all we know, they have one of those where they like, and it's all good, be on Earth.
Yeah, it's the craziest thing. We talk about these things, and it used to be that if you talked about in other dimensions and cross country and entanglement and all these kinds of, it used to be that if you did that, you were considered one of those far out types. The people who are talking that way now are the physicists. They're the ones talking about the multiverse. They're the ones talking about entanglement, what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. They're the ones that are talking about time travel, and it's an exciting time to live, because I think what we're seeing is the spiritual and the physical, the science and religion, or science and spirituality, coming together in one road now, and we're just using different language, but we're talking about the same thing. And I think we're beginning to understand with our mathematical equations and things like that, we're beginning to understand with the intellect what the ancients used to interpret through their spirit. And it can be an exciting time if we just open up and let it go.
Well, I think a lot of people sometimes they confuse being religious with being spiritual.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, they would not consider themselves religious per se, but they are very spiritual. In other words, their spirituality is important to them. They just might not want to do it within the confines of a certain religion per se. Yeah. But spiritual. And it's not like they've just totally, hey, it's only what I can see and touch, and that's it. And they're not agnostic or anything like that. They do totally believe it, if you want to call it a divine being, a creator, whatever you want to title it. It's just that they believe the way they want to believe, which to me is fine. Because usually if you're that type of person, you have a really hard time, I would say, hurting another human being. It doesn't, in other words, and this might be Marlene being generalized, if you have that within yourself, you believe in creation, not destruction per se. You see what I'm saying? Your intent is always to create, not to destroy. And so sometimes I agree with you. I think it's just a shifting around with a lot of the the underpinnings of, I don't want to say civilizations, but in a way our civilization overall.
Sure.
Dramatic shifts.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime or not, but I think we're going to see a real quantum leap forward, and I think we have to. I think we're approaching a very, very critical point in human history where we can either destroy ourselves or save ourselves.
Hopefully. Jim, do you think that we're ever going to have, and I'm glad you brought that up because I say it in my lifetime, it's like that they're ever actually going to have an official disclosure as to the existence of extraterrestrials or our contact as in modern humans with extraterrestrials?
Oh, I think so. I that's my personal belief. People talk about we're being watched, and I kind of agree with that. We're being watched and tried. In right now, if we were able to take our own brand of hate and warfare and everything else out there into the galaxy or into other dimensions, it would be a terrible thing. We would just take our human failings with us. And I think we are being watched to see. And I think this has happened in the past too, for earlier civilizations. They would reach a certain point and they had to make a decision. Are we going to save ourselves or destroy ourselves? And if the choice is made to save ourselves and to act on our best nature, our better nature, rather than all the other stuff, then all of a sudden we become worthy to continue. Otherwise, we're not. And so the decision is not going to be made, I don't think, by an entity from outside. I think it's something that we're going to have to, if we're going to look for a savior, it's got to be within the human heart.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I hear so many people hearing that they think the ETs are going to save us. And it's like, I think you need to realize that it's all about us.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we have to prove ourselves. We have to graduate.
Yes. So, you hear about the 30-year-old that's still living at home in the basement, or it's okay. We need to get on out and do our thing.
I'm seeing all kinds of strange things happen to the screen. Does that mean
sometimes you were slowing down, you were coming in a little bit choppy. So I was trying to
okay. I see.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, I lost him, and it's blinked out on me a couple of times.
I didn't know. I know that I didn't know what our time was here, and I thought maybe something was starting to say.
I got that under control. But anyway, I wanted to thank you, Jim, for joining us. It has been great.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Marlene.
It has been absolutely fantastic. Are you going to be writing a new book, or are you just going to go back and revise your older one?
No, I am. I just finished my first audiobook. We're in the midst of final production right now, which is my first work of fiction. It's called The Wizard in the Wood. And then we've got a number of ideas. I'm working on a trilogy right now of spiritual applications of ancient stories. For instance, the Merlin the Magician story, or the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, or even Robin Hood is going to enter into that. So I've got a lot of different projects in the works.
Fantastic. That's
if
great.
People want to, if anybody's listening and they want to find out what's going on, my website is at jimwillis.net, www.jimwillis.net. And it also introduces you to my YouTube page. We have a series of YouTube videos about dowsing, and it leads you to my, we're also on the YouTube page. We're doing a series of little books about spiritual lessons from nature. Okay. So far we've talked about butterflies and cardinals, birds. So that's all coming up. So if you want to look at jimwillis.net, it'll keep you informed of all the different stuff that's going on.
I have a link to your website on the credits of the show, Jim. But I'm glad you gave out that information for the podcast listeners.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you, and I want to wish you the best of luck. And I'll be keeping tabs on you so you can come back.
Oh, I hope so, Marlene. Marlene, it's great talking to you.
Yes,
wonderful.
Take care.
We'll see you next time.
Absolutely. You got it. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Wow. That's incredible. Let me tell you that I was so thrilled to find somebody to bring a guest that was a dowser, because I'm a dowser. Over there, you can't see them because they're hung on my closet door. I have my bag, and I have my what they call L rods. They're very basic. And I've used them for dowsing. And even when I was doing paranormal work, I would do the dowsing. Sometimes to either locate energy fields, sometimes even portals. I've used them with communications, with entities. The thing is that with the dowsing, as far as the rods, you're kind of limited, because you can, for example, you can only ask kind of questions like yes or no. Or, for example, if we wanted to try to narrow down, let's say the age, you would say, are you between, this is an example, 10 to 15 years of age? It would say yes or no. You got to know, then you would go to the next 5. Then if you want to narrow it down. But my point being that using the dowsing rods and that type of work, you got to either have a lot of patience, because it's time consuming. But a lot of the information I got, absolutely, when you're working then with an intelligent entity, is my point. When you've got, when you're using the dowsing rods for that. And some of the best proof of activity I've gotten with using the dowsing rods. Stuff that later on, even answers that we got were, as a matter of fact, one of the times we had this was in an apartment of all things. And I was asked to come in from another group had already been there. And they said, they asked for me to come in to help them out. And I said, sure. And the leader of that group, she knew I had worked with dowsing rods. She asked me to bring them. I said, okay, fine. And she was handling all the equipment, the cameras. And I was like, okay, I'm great. I'm doing my. And this girl was now living. She was married, had a baby. Can't remember if it was a boy or girl, but like a toddler. They lived in an apartment. And then out of the blue, she had not been living there that long, but then out of the blue, stuff started going crazy in the household. And she just couldn't figure it out. And then the only tip-off she had was one day she has this very, very vivid dream where she sees a guy she used to, and it's really funny. This guy she used to know, I want to say she liked him, but I want to say he was involved with somebody else. It was one of those things where, people meet and there's that chemistry and then just don't connect. They don't, I think he was already in a relationship. One of those where for different reasons, he ships off to war. I want to say this was back. I want to say it was early 2000s. So I think it was Afghanistan. I want to say bottom line, he went off to Afghanistan and he got killed. He got killed in Afghanistan. And, once he left, she kind of lost touch with him. They traded letters a couple of times, but then, she did her thing. She did his thing. Remember, this was many years ago that I had this experience. So I want to say, I can't remember now if she just had a dream, a really vivid dream with him out of the blue, where she sees him. And I think this was, if I remember correctly, this was the one time that she kind of like wondered, because she says, after we lost touch and time passed, I really didn't think about him. I never dreamt about him. And she says it was such a vivid dream that I think this was along the time that she started trying to find out if something had happened to him. Okay. And they asked me to do a dowsing. I went to, she had different things happening to her, and I went into the bedroom and she gave me like a list of questions to ask, and she left. I went to the bedroom and I closed the door, and I asked was it him? He said yes. I asked, do you have this type of car? It was like, is it this car or this car? And basically it took like an hour. So I came out and I said, well, whoever's in there, this is what they told me. Basically, he gave all the right information about his name, gave the right information about the last car that she knew that he had, gave all the right information about things I had no idea. In other words, if anybody's thinking, okay, Marlene, you were maneuvering these dowsing rods subconsciously, or you were picking this information out of your subconscious mind, I had no idea anything whatsoever about this guy that ended up getting killed. And basically the story was, he almost wanted, besides saying like a last goodbye, all these people, her and him, they were in their 20s, they were young, was this regret, because it was almost like you were the one that I was meant to be. And I'm sorry that and almost like, that thing of like, I could kick myself for not being with you. In other words, part of what the thing was that he couldn't get over the fact that he lost his chance to be with her, for them and her to be together, because he stayed with that person, he went off and he got killed. That's it. She's alive. She has a child. She married somebody else. But in other words, if for lack of a better word, it was almost like he was hanging out a little bit because of regret. Regret, like I should have done this. I should have been with you. And now I know I never can be. So we kind of did, like, later on, we did like a conversation with him. But we kind of told her, I said, look, we could tell him this and everything, but it's never going to be the same as in you telling him this yourself. Because he knew he was dead. In other words, this was not a spirit that was caught up thinking, I'm still alive. This was somebody that knew that they were dead, but was just filled with this regret over, missed opportunities, who knows, things. And let's face it, when you are in your 20s, even I imagine, even if you go to war, you're thinking you're going to live forever, or you still have time to do whatever it is that you want to do. Maybe you go off and you realize, man, that girl could have been my one true love, but here I am now and I'm worlds away. But when I get back, or when I do, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to look her up, or I'm going to see a way of finding her. And the next thing you know, you're dead. You've been killed. And this is what happened to this guy. So basically we told her, you need to, every time you feel him around you, because she kept feeling him a lot in the bedroom, which was a problem. I said, you need to tell him, look, you're dead, and I'm sorry this happened to you, but you need to go into the light. And we told her, you gotta repeat it. He's gonna let go eventually, but it's not the same as when it comes from you, because you are his anchor to this thing that's keeping him from moving on. And it's really funny because in reality, they never had this torrid romance that went nowhere. But it was one of these things that for some reason tied him, that moment of regret that he could never undo. And the girl in the other group, which was the one that she had, was the point of origin as far as communications between them, followed up with her. And she said that little by little, it started to lessen. And as far as this feeling of him around, she says it wasn't right away, but little by little by little. Then she says towards the end that it had kind of decreased to almost nothing. I believe they bought a house and they moved out. They moved out of the apartment. But this girl was really going, she's pulling her hair out at the beginning, because at the beginning she had no idea where the origin of this was. She had been living happily in this apartment for a while, and all of a sudden it started up. And her first tip off was that vivid dream that she had with somebody that she hadn't seen in a few years. That it was him. She says she couldn't make head or tails, and she didn't know what to do. Oh, and another thing, that these things only used to happen when she was alone at home with a baby. In other words, when her husband was home, she was like, man, I didn't want to be telling him all this stuff because I don't want him to think I'm going crazy. So it puts a person in a real jam when you're the only one experiencing this. And I've talked to enough people that this is exactly what happens to them. So yeah, it was an interesting, as far as the dowsing rods, I used the dowsing rods on that. It was very successful. So guys, I hope you like the show with Jim Willis. I urge you to go to his website. You can look up as far as any of his projects, his written works, also his things that he's got, working on. You could tell this is a gentleman that had, after 40 years of basically living his religious life one way, he recognized, man, I was kind of limiting myself here. I was wrong, or limiting, that's the only way I can think of it. So I'm sure he has a lot of insight into the books that he's written. If I've got a great bunch of guests lined up, new guests, I have some returning guests, but a lot of new guests. Again, if you want to listen to any of the podcasts for any of the shows, just go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, and I have links there where you can listen to the podcast version of the show. You either click it and you can listen to it on the browser, or you can download the MP3 file, but it's without commercial interruption. Okay. Otherwise, I do have links again to the the podcast platforms, whether it's iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeart, all of those, I have links there that you could find the show there, because I know everybody sometimes has their favorite stuff. Again, I'm working. Well, no, I'm almost. It'll soon be here. This is when I'm not doing the shows. I'm basically finishing this up, the number 2 of this one, which is Hatem Anakoslav Film Noir Murders number 2. This is the part most people hate, which is, I mean, I have somebody editing my edit, but I still edit it firsthand for a lot of stuff. So that's the drudgery work of writing. That should be out hopefully September 9th. Available on Amazon and of course my website. I am considering, and I would love to hear from you guys what you think, doing a live show for Halloween. I'm not sure yet. Let me know what you think and what you would like to talk, or we could just have it what they call open lines. We could talk about anything paranormal. Of course, on Halloween, what better thing is there than talk about the paranormal? Let me know. Send me an email, marlene@miamighostchronicles.com, if you would like for me to do a live show, a live stream on Halloween. And if I can't get the questions on chat, because I know sometimes I just go crazy, I might even put out a phone number for people to call or text in their questions. Depending. I don't know yet how I'm going to handle that. So something to think about, but I'm open to ideas and suggestions. marlene@miamighostchronicles.com. And again, you can go to nightshadediary.com. That's my website for the podcast series, which I do a lot of the I narrate a lot of the old time stories from Weird Tales, Lovecraft, you name it. There's a lot of people that really like those. Robert E. Howard, creator of Conan, things of that nature. If you go to supernaturalstorytime.com, that's the podcast series for scary stories, like regular old scary stories, modern time. I narrate those. So whatever it is that you like, I got your back, baby. So guys, thank you so much for being part of my audience. You are all absolutely wonderful. And please come back next week and let's spend some time together. Take care.